Greetings, Star Wars fans. Whether you're a clone trooper from the planet of Kamino or you're a rebel from the planet of Lothal, my name is John Edward Lee, and I'm here with another episode of Universe Expanding Books and Toys, the wonderful world of Star Wars animation. This will be the last episode of that series. We went through the Ewoks and Droids series. We went through the Tartakovsky series, as well as the Dave Filoni CGI Clone Wars series. And now I'm going through the rest. I'm going to tell you right off the bat, most of this is going to be about Rebels. It by far had the most stuff in it. It had the most comic books, the most figures, the most episodes. But there were 4 other series that revolve around that didn't have too much around them, but I don't want to skip those either because it's just as important. Now, before I get into that, there are a couple things that I want to go into that are sort of adjacent to Clone Wars and Rebels specifically, because they sort of bridge the gap. One of them is one of the earliest books in Star Wars canon, Lords of the Sith, about the first few, days of the Empire itself, or relatively early on to it. So just after Clone Wars, you can see Empire, the Emperor, and Darth Vader are the main characters, but the main character is Cham Syndulla. He was a Twi'lek rebellious leader from the planet of Ryloth. He was in Clone Wars, he was in Rebels, he's been in a bunch of things, and I think he's important to point out. There's no figure of him, but that book was awesome, and it felt like a bridge between the two series, even though it came out before Rebels, I think. And it also features the Blurgs, who are originally from the Ewoks movies, who also made it into Mandalorian. Many fans will also know he's the father of Hera Syndulla, who is a much bigger character from Rebels and the Rebellion after that. Also in that same era is the Ahsoka YA novel, a great book to explain where, she goes after Clone Wars. It begins, the first page is in the Siege of Mandalore, which didn't get shown until the final season of Clone Wars that was made well after the series. So they tied it in really well. And of course you can see she's got those white lightsabers that she has in Rebels. So a really good bridge between the two. But we're talking about animated series in particular, and I like to go in chronological order. The first thing I want to talk about is the Bad Batch. I don't have any toys for Bad Batch. They have brought out a bunch. The Bad Batch themselves, Omega, Imperial Commander, the Stealth Trooper, Captain Rex, and that's just in the Black Series alone. I think they've probably done about the same characters, not as many in the Vintage Collection. When these characters came out, they came out in the last season of Clone Wars, the one that, like the Ahsoka, came way after. They did 6 seasons, and then Disney bought Lucasfilm, and they axed the show, and then picked it up years later, a couple years ago, with the final season where Bad Batch originally showed up. They got their own show. They were specialized clone troopers who had individual personalities, individual skills. They were known as Clone Force 99. Now, there are no comic books, no books about them. But that doesn't mean they don't have echoes into stuff that came up before it. When they first originally showed them, they reminded me very, very much of characters that had appeared in the Star Wars comic, the one that takes place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, a series of characters called Task Force 99. Clone Force 99 is Bad Batch. Task Force 99 is Scar Squadron, a group of stormtroopers with individualized personalities and skills. And that's what they look like. They're eerily similar to Bad Batch, even though they came way before. There's a sniper, there's a big guy like Wrecker, so Crosshair's Wrecker. This is not Hunter, and I'll talk about him in just a second. But you can see that there's a parallel. When this came out, people didn't have Bad Batch yet, so there was a lot of speculation as to what he was gonna, what they were, and a lot of people thought that they might have been the stormtroopers that were originally Delta Squad. The only reason I don't like that is because they had a different story in the old continuity, and I don't think it would fit as well, although I'd gladly have that happen. Scar Squadron is led by Commander Creel, who has a lightsaber. He's not Force sensitive, but he dogs Luke for many, many issues. They start out in issue like 19, and go so far as to get to like issue 60 or 61, but I picked 60 because that's another good picture of him. Here is another great picture of Scar Squadron, aka Task Force 99. You can see you got that sniper there, Crosshairs type character. There's a character named Mike who's communications like Echo, and there's a technical dude as well. So it's very similar. Now, that's pretty much it for Bad Batch. If they ever want to do an action figure that I will get, they should get a Stormtrooper. The Stormtroopers in the Bad Batch were the first line of Stormtroopers, day one of the Empire, and they looked less like the traditional Stormtrooper and more like the Ralph McQuarrie Stormtrooper design, that one specifically. And I like it a lot. It looks more military than the Stormtrooper outfit, and I think it was great just to see them show up in Bad Batch at all. That design has never been used canonically before. Speaking of Ralph McQuarrie, that just leads me right into the next series, Rebels. Rebels looked like a Ralph McQuarrie painting. You could pause it and it would look like a Ralph McQuarrie painting. Zeb Orrelios is based on the original sketches of Chewbacca, in fact. But when Disney bought Lucasfilm, they axed Clone Wars and they decided they were going to create their own new animated series with the same, basic crew. Dave Filoni was involved in both, and then just sort of start over with something new. And it turned out to be amazing. Just like Clone Wars, the first season's a little kiddie and it takes a little getting into. Rebels is the same way, but once it does, all the characters you start to love them. In fact, you start to really love them as a family. Starting everything off canonically was A New Dawn. I like to think of this as sort of a spiritual sequel to Lords of the Sith because that had Cham Syndulla. This is Hera Syndulla. Kanan Jarrus has been hiding as not as a Jedi, hiding his force, working in a mine. She's a rebel operative, finds him, and they eventually, become the core of the Ghost Crew that we eventually get to. It is a pretty decent novel. It has one of my favorite Imperial villains, Count Vidian, who unfortunately doesn't show up in anything else. It also has Ray Sloan. When she was much younger and a younger officer, she eventually becomes an admiral. In fact, I think she becomes Grand Admiral in the Aftermath series. But very, very good book. John Jackson Miller is one of my favorite Star Wars writers. In fact, he and I share the same birthday. Now, they did have comic books as well, and the first one that came out was Kanan the Last Padawan, which is about him as a Jedi Padawan. Caleb Dune was his original name, and you're saying, well, this doesn't go out of order canonically. The backstory of this is something happens to Kanan, and he's in a Bacta-tank, and he relives living through Order 66. Now, they were 12 issues of this, and it's very, very popular. It was very popular, and the issues are worth a lot because it was the first appearance of a lot of the Rebels characters. And there's the Rebel Ghost Crew: Hera, Kanan, Ezra, Chopper, Zeb, Sabine, who, like I said before, are more like a family. If I have never mentioned it before, Rebels is my favorite animated series for Star Wars because of that. Clone Wars jumped around. You would have episodes with Anakin and Obi-Wan and Ahsoka. Then you'd have episodes about another character for 4 episodes. And then you'd have something else that happened, for 3 or 4 episodes. And it jumped around, but they always revolved around those characters. Like I said, these issues tend to have some value because they're the first and sometimes only appearance in comics of those characters. This is an interesting series because of Bad Batch. There's my favorite cover of there, and you can see him with the shock troopers, the clone troopers, because it's about Kanan escaping Order 66, which they covered in Bad Batch. They changed a couple things in there. They incorporated the Bad Batch as characters into the story, so it goes off the rails a little bit. I never have a problem with that. I'm a comic book fan. Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, they all do that all the time. That's not a big deal to me. Some people, they can't handle that. They didn't show up in much else as far as traditional issues. The Star Wars Adventures comics by IDW did have some adventures with them, although it focused more on Hondo, Who's going to complain about that? Everybody loves Hondo. There's another one with Ezra and Hondo. And they even got their own tale in Vader's castle. You can see them right there. Beware the haunting of the ghost, their ship. That didn't stop with comics as far as individual issues. Shortly after that, they translated the Japanese manga of Star Wars Rebels, which is very good. There's the crew. These covers are amazing. And of course, the art is spectacular. There's an Inquisitor right there. Some Stormtrooper action. It feels like the show. It feels like an anime of the show, but of course in comic form. Now you'd say, well, that's got to be it. They're done, right? Well, no. Recently this year, IDW has lost their license, and now Dark Horse, who originally did Star Wars comic books in the 90s through the purchase of Star Wars by Disney, is back. This was originally like a promo version of German comics that were translated in English and brought out in the United States. This one's relatively small. That was like a promo, but here's the real thing. It's over 500 pages of various Rebels adventures, ones that are exclusive to this series. So there's a lot of story content for the Rebels beyond the show itself, which was 5 seasons of really, really great episodes. You know, some episodes that are the most emotional episodes to me. That's why it's my favorite. Of course, they did have figures for that. One of my favorite things about it is they were able to incorporate a teenage Leia. They also had a young Lando. Obi-Wan is in it. Yoda is in it. Like, most of the main characters from the original movie are in it. Han and Chewbacca are not, and I think that's pretty much it. But Vader's in it, you know, pretty much everybody. R2 and C-3PO are in it. One of my favorite aspects of it, it introduced the Inquisitor, and there's the Grand Inquisitor, who you may also know from the Kenobi TV series. Those were ex-Jedi or Force users who were basically, you know, brought in by Vader to hunt down any Force user. And there's episodes where they're stealing babies to like raise them as future Inquisitors, and also became a huge basis for not only Kenobi, but the Last Jedi series, which also featured a Jedi hiding in a job trying not to use the Force like Kanan was. Like I said, Vader was in this series as well as Ahsoka, and Vader has very much the Ralph McQuarrie angulared face that he had originally. So again, that picks up that. Maul was in this series as well, and there's the second sister, one of the Inquisitors. One of my favorite things about Rebels is Freddie Prinze Jr. is the voice of Kanan, and his wife in real life, Sarah Michelle Gellar, aka Buffy the Vampire Slayer, is that second sister. There's some Black Series figures as well. I only had the female characters for the main crew, so there's Hera, who's definitely one of my favorite characters, has showed up in many comics, like the Star Wars series, like Dr. Aphra, and was present at the Battle of Endor. Sabine, the Mandalorian graffiti artist, isn't a great character. She's going to show up in the Ahsoka live-action show, as well as Ezra. And yeah, there's Ahsoka herself from Rebels. Now, my only issue with that is her lightsabers are kind of blue. I wish they were the white color, but they're lighter blue than most of the other ones. I don't want to give it away, but there's a very specific reason why her lightsaber is white. So I'm going to go a bit off on a tangent right now, because another major character in Rebels was Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was from 1991, the Heir to the Empire Zahn trilogy, and he finally made it into canon. There's a bit of idea what he looked like in the cartoon. In the show, I think in the show he's a little bit more ruthless than I'm used to him being. I think he's a little off character, but that doesn't mean I don't love him. His Nogri bodyguard Rook is also from that series, who shows up. That there's no figure for him. But here's why I go off on a tangent. Because that was so popular and so well received, Timothy Zahn went back and wrote another trilogy of Thrawn books. Thrawn Thrawn Alliances, where he teams up with Vader and flashes back to an adventure during the Clone Wars where he teams up with Anakin Skywalker, and Thrawn Treason to end off that trilogy. Wow, a whole new Thrawn trilogy from Timothy Zahn. Well, that wasn't it. He did another trilogy, the Ascension trilogy. This is a series of books about Thrawn with his original people, the Chiss, before he joins the Empire or even comes to this part of the galaxy. And there's the final one. This is an interesting series of books because he's kind of the good guy in it. It almost feels like Star Trek. He's with his people. The only reason he's a bad guy is because he works for the Empire in the original ones. Now, they did bring out a really amazing comic book adaptation of that series. And lots of great covers of everyone's favorite. Hey, look, there's Price, who is also from Rebels. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who also shows up in Rebels. And it's just a really, really great series. And of course, there's the Emperor and Vader. All right, so that pretty much wraps it up for Rebels. Even with the tangent of going off, I can't help but talk about Thrawn. So they got away from the computer animated series with their next animated series, which was called Star Wars Resistance. Star Wars Resistance was to connect to the sequel trilogy. It takes place about a year before The Force Awakens. So it is a completely different era. The animation is computer, but it's more traditional cell-looking animation. It also was really not popular. I remember getting like 6 episodes into it and going, I'm not sure that I like this show. It features the main character. Let's see if I can grab him real quick. I was going to show these in a row, but the main character, Kaz Zarudo. I never could. How do you say that name? I can never remember. Anyways, he was a hotshot pilot that Poe Dameron basically convinces to become a rebel spy, which he's very excited to do. And he actually loans him BB-8 for a series of time, although he eventually gets his own round droid. Obviously, this got a series of figures. These figures were not popular. I got these all on clearance, which is a shame because they're very colorful. There's the pirate figure. I feel like if that show had been more popular, it would have had a 3rd season. It would have also had a lot more figures. I mean, really cool designs on like TIE fighter pilots. Commander Pyre, who was really cool, who sort of almost was like a gold version of Captain Phasma. Stormtroopers are just regular First Order Stormtroopers, but it's still a pretty good figure. And these figures are just like 5 points of articulation. They just do that, but just like the Rebels, they didn't get like the full like bendy arms and stuff. They're also like that, which is annoying, but they look so good. And because they're in box for me, it does not bother me at all. Tora, who is just, look how colorful these characters are. They very much look very Star Wars. I understand why this show wasn't popular, but I wish it had been. And of course, I love that droid who doesn't have any dome, so he just wears a X-Wing pilot helmet on instead. Like I said, I wasn't originally liking this show. Kaz is so clumsy, he makes Jar Jar look like a ballet dancer. And there are times where it's just off-putting. Now, that doesn't mean that the show didn't start to get better. About episode 17 of 20 in the first episode, I started to really love it. And again, if you think of the first season of Rebels or Clone Wars, that sort of happens there too. There's a first season where it's sort of like, where is this going? And then it starts to click. The second season is fantastic and just builds and builds and gets better and better. But of course it was canceled because there just was a lack of interest. And by the time that the final movies came out, Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, the desire to see stories in that time period just petered out. In fact, they didn't even do an adaptation, comic book wise, of The Rise of Skywalker, even though they've done it for every other movie. no books and almost no comics. The only thing I have is an issue of Star Wars Adventure that happens to have Kaz in it itself. Unfortunately, that's the end of that show. It's not going to come back. I doubt anyone will ever the interest is ever going to peak on it again. Maybe in the future when people when the sequel trilogy's been out for a while, I think you're going to have people who grew up with it who are going to really attach to it, and people will start to love it like the prequels. Now, that's it for the main series, but that didn't mean that Disney didn't do some anthology series, which they absolutely did. The first one was Star Wars Visions, which were short, non-canonical stories that were anime that sort of took place in a more Japanese setting. The very first one featured this character Ronin, who is he's a ex-Sith really, but you can see the red blade. He goes around hunting Sith. This book starts out, the first chapter is that short and then expands the story. So it's very, very cool. They will be doing another Star Wars Visions, but I think that's coming out in 2023 as well. As far as comic books, just recently, like a month or two ago, they brought out this issue, which is sort of a prequel to that first short with the Ronin. It's really awesome because it is black and white, like the short is, and like manga is, but once lightsabers start coming out, the story stays black and white, but with the flashes of color that people come to expect from a lightsaber blade. Lightsaber blade in black and white it doesn't do it. It's not exciting. Now, they did one other anthology series which came up very, very recently, and that is Tales of the Jedi, which is about young Dooku and his path, and then of course about the birth of Ahsoka and her development, sort of a prequel to the Clone Wars. No comic books or books made for that, but I can't help point out that I really wish they didn't use the exact logo from the Tales of the Jedi comic book series. This comic book takes place 3,000 years, 4,000 years before the original movie. Of all the titles, I wish they'd just done something else. Tales of Dooku and Ahsoka or something like that, pre-Clone Wars or something. But the fact that they use the exact logo kind of bothers me, just because it feels like they're trying to just pretend this didn't exist. And this is one of my favorite series of all times. If you ever wanted to animate or live action something that's gonna get my attention more than anything else, doing the story of Nomi Sunrider, Exar Kun, and all those characters would be fantastic. And if you've never read those comics, they are really, 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 really good. That's it for animation. We are all caught up. I haven't heard of any other animated stuff coming out besides another Visions. I would love to see what could it, and of course more Bad Batch. What could they do at this point? I would love to see a continuation of Ewoks or droids, or even another Tartakovsky series. He's still doing cartoons. I think that's possible, but unlikely, because his most popular thing recently has been the Hotel Transylvania movies. So that's it. We've reached the end of the wonderful world of Star Wars animation. Hopefully we will get more bits of animation, more books and comics based on those, more toys based on those. Hasbro did those renewed droids figures. They look like the original package, but with modern versions of it. Do that for Ewoks, please. I would love to see a Wicket in that Ewoks package. That's my favorite. Again, thank you for joining me. This has been Universe Expanding Books and Toys, and I am John Edward Lee. We will be back with something new. I'm trying to decide whether I want to do character spotlights or just continue this with video games instead and talk about the books and comics and toys that revolved around various Star Wars video games, because there's a lot. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. And of course, please share, like, and subscribe to Universe Expanding Books and Toys. In the meantime, I will see you later, and remember that the Force will be with you, always.